I've got some troubling news about England's royal family.
Princess Anne did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Before King Charles could bring the morning meeting to order, his sister placed a signed directive beside his briefing folder and calmly announced that Queen Camilla's unofficial influence over palace appointments, private schedules, and household briefings had been suspended. Camilla stared across the table. Charles read the opening paragraph twice, and then, to everyone's astonishment, said nothing. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Anne remained standing, as silence tightened around Buckingham Palace's private council room. William watched his father. The family council was a closed meeting, where senior royals confronted sensitive household matters. That privacy mattered, because Anne was not challenging Camilla's title or marriage. She was cutting off the quiet channels through which personal wishes had begun shaping official decisions. Camilla reached for the directive and called it a recommendation. Her fingers tightened when the Princess Royal explained what she had activated. The confidential household governance protocol was an internal safeguard used to pause disputed decisions for independent review. 3 household trustees, official custodians of proper palace procedure, had signed it before sunrise. Their approval meant the suspension was already active. It required no consent from the Queen, and Charles could not dismiss it before examining the evidence. Anne stated the consequences without softening a word. Camilla had immediately lost informal access to staffing choices, ceremonial planning, private appointments, and selected royal briefings. A royal briefing was confidential information prepared before meetings or public duties. Control over it mattered, because whoever decided what reached the king could influence what he approved, rejected, or never discovered. Charles looked at his wife, then his sister. He wanted to defend the woman who had endured years of hostility beside him, but Anne's expression warned that this was not an emotional accusation. William leaned forward and asked whether his father had seen the supporting record. The future king's careful question deepened the wound. Even he feared decisions had been made behind the monarch's back. Anne slid a sealed folder across the table. She told Charles it contained a documented chain of altered schedules, redirected messages, and appointments influenced without his full knowledge. Camilla stopped arguing. The king opened it, read one marked entry, removed his glasses, and placed them beside the pages. "How long have you known?" he asked. Anne held her brother's gaze. "Since Windsor, 6 weeks ago." That answer changed everything. Charles had watched his sister close the door on Camilla's palace influence, but the reason began with one private reception, and a decision the Queen believed nobody would dare challenge. This was never simply a struggle over schedules, staff, or palace protocol. At its heart stood 2 women who had survived the monarchy in profoundly different ways. Anne had built her life around duty, without demanding affection. Camilla had fought for acceptance after years of public hostility. Between them stood Charles, a husband determined to protect his wife, and a brother who knew his sister would never act without a reason powerful enough to wound them all. Anne carried the late Queen's lessons like an unbreakable promise. The monarch had taught her daughter that royal service, the public work performed on behalf of the crown, must never become a path to personal control. That belief shaped every difficult choice the Princess Royal made. She knew that opposing Charles would hurt him, but remaining silent could leave her brother surrounded by decisions he had never truly made. Camilla carried a different kind of history. She had spent years enduring rejection, before becoming Charles's closest companion and most trusted source of comfort. His private household, the staff responsible for his personal schedule, correspondence, and daily duties, slowly began treating her preferences as extensions of his wishes. To the Queen Consort, that influence represented acceptance. To Anne, it threatened the boundary between supporting the king and quietly speaking for him. Charles felt that conflict tearing through him. He understood why his sister had acted, yet her intervention felt like a devastating judgment on his marriage. The king had defended his wife through years of public anger, and now Anne was suggesting that his loyalty had allowed her authority to expand unchecked. He could forgive criticism of himself. He could not easily forgive the humiliation Camilla was suffering because of it. William's private warning made the danger impossible to dismiss. During a confidential conversation later preserved in Anne's documented account, the prince explained that several briefing decisions had reached him with key instructions altered. One meeting had been delayed without his father's knowledge. Another message had been softened until its original meaning disappeared. The future king feared that someone between him and Charles had begun filtering what each man was allowed to know. Anne listened without interrupting. When William finished, she asked him to record every change he could remember. Camilla found Charles alone in a quiet corridor after the meeting. She asked whether he truly believed she had manipulated his household. The Queen expected an immediate denial, the same protective answer he had given her for years. Instead, the monarch lowered his eyes and said he needed time to examine Anne's evidence. That pause wounded her more deeply than any accusation. She stepped back, understanding that his certainty had already started to fracture. Anne felt no victory. She had protected her brother by forcing him to doubt the person closest to him, and the cost sat heavily on her conscience. Yet her case had not begun with suspicion alone. It began inside Windsor Castle, where one altered reception decision transformed concern into action, and pushed the entire family beyond the point of return. 6 weeks before the shutdown, a carefully planned Windsor reception became the setting for a quiet act of palace power. No argument erupted, and no announcement was made. A name simply vanished from the program. Another appeared in its place, and a trusted royal aide was instructed not to trouble the king with the change. Anne noticed the empty chair that evening. By midnight, she understood that the alteration was neither accidental nor harmless. Anne had personally helped organize the reception to honor leaders from military charities supported by the royal family. These charities provided practical help to serving personnel, veterans, and their families, making the event more than a ceremonial gathering. Charles had approved the original program because the work reflected years of service carried out by his sister. The program, the official list showing guests, speeches, and the order of events, had already passed through several palace offices. Every approval should have protected it from unexplained changes. Instead, that long chain had hidden the interference. Anne entered the reception expecting to greet a decorated charity director she had invited personally. She found his chair empty and his name missing from the speaking order. A foundation patron closely connected to Camilla's office occupied his place. The Princess Royal felt embarrassment harden into fury, because the removed guest had traveled to Windsor after receiving written confirmation. More importantly, the substitution turned an evening about military service into a display of personal favor. The excluded director approached Anne privately near the end of the event. He told her that a palace official had called that afternoon and described his presence as no longer suitable. The charity leader repeated his account in a signed statement the following morning, attaching the original invitation and the telephone number used to contact him. Anne apologized, but his quiet disappointment cut deeply. Someone had damaged his dignity while using the palace's authority to make the insult appear official. Camilla had privately instructed her senior aide to replace the director with a patron loyal to the Queen's foundation. She also ordered the change withheld from Charles until after the reception, believing the king would accept it once the evening had passed. A royal foundation was a charitable organization connected to a senior family member and used to support selected causes. Giving its patron a prominent position increased both access and influence. That was why the substitution mattered, and why Anne could not dismiss it as a harmless favor. Anne confronted the aide in a service corridor after the final guests departed. The official first denied receiving a direct instruction, then produced a handwritten approval notation bearing Camilla's initials. A palace security recording later preserved in the Household Review captured his final admission. Similar changes had happened before. Anne did not confront the Queen that night. She began collecting altered schedules, redirected messages, and delayed briefings. By the time she carried that sealed folder into the palace council room, she held more than suspicion. She held a pattern, and Camilla was about to face it line by line. Camilla finally pushed back. With the council room doors closed and every aide dismissed, she accused Anne of disguising a personal vendetta as institutional protection. The Princess Royal remained seated until the Queen challenged her loyalty to Charles. Then Anne rose, opened the sealed folder, and laid 6 marked decisions across the table. Her response was quiet, merciless, and impossible to misunderstand. Supporting the king did not give you permission to speak as the king. Charles felt the room tighten around him. The council meeting, a private gathering used to settle serious family and household disputes, had moved beyond procedure and become a direct battle over his authority. Anne pointed to the first marked entry, the altered Windsor guest list. The next 5 covered a redirected briefing, delayed correspondence, a staff recommendation, a change in ceremonial precedents, and restricted access to the king. Ceremonial precedents meant the formal order deciding where royal figures stood, sat, or appeared during official events. Changing it could quietly raise one person's status while diminishing another's. Camilla refused to accept Anne's interpretation. She told Charles that his health, endless duties, and crushing workload had forced her to make urgent choices when the palace machinery became too slow. The Queen Consort insisted that she had protected him from unnecessary pressure, not stolen his power. Her voice shook only once, when she reminded the monarch how often he had asked her to shield him from exhausting details. Anne heard the pain but did not retreat. She told her brother that protection without clear consent eventually became control. The Princess Royal argued that love could explain Camilla's actions, yet it could not excuse officials treating her preferences as royal commands. Charles flinched. His sister had exposed the weakness he had tried to hide. During his most difficult periods, he had depended on others so heavily that he no longer knew which decisions were truly his. Camilla stood and faced Anne across the table. She demanded that the suspension directive be withdrawn before the humiliation spread beyond the room. The document was a formal written instruction that temporarily removed her unofficial access, while the evidence underwent review. Anne pushed it toward the Queen and refused. No raised voice followed. No apology softened the answer. The silence itself became the blow. William finally broke his silence. Speaking for the official audio record of the meeting, he confirmed that one of his private briefings had been delayed after Camilla's office objected to its contents. The prince explained that the message concerned future household responsibilities and should have reached him directly. Instead, the future king received it 2 days late, and without a paragraph Charles had personally approved. Charles reached for the remaining evidence. One page contained a communication record involving his private secretary, the senior official responsible for managing the sovereign's work and most sensitive information. The king read the same line twice. The official had been instructed to keep a major appointment recommendation away from him until Camilla's office approved it first. Charles looked toward his wife, but no defense came. The confrontation had stripped away every polite disguise. Yet the worst discovery was no longer what Camilla had changed. It was how deeply her influence had reached. Royal influence rarely announces itself with commands. It travels through trusted voices, altered folders, delayed telephone calls, and invitations that never arrive. Anne's evidence revealed a palace network built not through official authority, but through personal loyalty. Camilla had not seized control of the monarchy. She had created something more subtle, a circle of aides who understood her preferences before Charles ever expressed his own, and acted accordingly. Charles saw the danger immediately. Proximity to the sovereign, the reigning king or queen, gave certain officials daily access to his thoughts, moods, and unfinished decisions. When those aides treated Camilla's wishes as extensions of his intentions, personal preferences acquired the force of royal commands. That mattered because palace staff rarely questioned instructions they believed came from the king. A suggestion could become policy before the monarch even knew it existed. Anne made the boundary clear. Her directive targeted the unofficial network surrounding the queen consort, not Camilla's marriage, title, constitutional position, or legitimate public duties. A constitutional position described a royal figure's recognized place within the monarchy, and the limits attached to that role. The queen would still support charities, attend ceremonies, and stand beside Charles. What she could no longer do was influence unrelated household decisions through private channels that carried no formal accountability. Charles dismissed the remaining officials and asked his private secretary to stay. The senior official managed the king's working papers, appointments, and confidential communication, making him the final barrier between the sovereign and competing palace interests. The monarch asked whether any instructions had been withheld from him. His secretary lowered his eyes. In a recorded interview preserved for the Household Review, he admitted that several matters had been resolved before reaching Charles because Camilla's office had already expressed a preference. Anne uncovered the mechanism inside a set of routing sheets. Each household proposal carried a colored mark showing which office could review it first. Blue meant direct delivery to the king. Gold sent the matter through Camilla's team before it reached him. Red delayed it until her aides approved further discussion. The Princess Royal compared the sheets with Charles's official diary and found that several gold-marked proposals had never appeared before him at all. Charles felt exposed. He had trusted intermediaries to protect his time, especially when exhaustion made every decision feel heavier. Instead, that dependence had allowed private loyalties to wear the mask of royal authority. The deepest wound arrived when he found a senior appointment he believed had been voluntarily withdrawn. A documented communication showed that the candidate had been discouraged after objections from the Queen's inner circle. Charles stopped reading and authorized an immediate restructuring of the briefing system. Every proposal would now move directly through his office, while Anne's review team examined past decisions. 2 senior aides received dismissal notices before the meeting ended. The network had operated quietly, but its dismantling would not remain quiet. Behind one closing office door, Camilla was about to discover how much influence had already disappeared. The consequences arrived before sunset. Camilla's office received a revised access list. 3 regular briefings were removed from her schedule, and 2 senior aides were told to surrender their household credentials pending review. Nothing about the process was theatrical. That made it more brutal. For years, doors had opened before she reached them. Now, standing outside the king's private briefing room, Camilla watched one close while Anne remained inside. Camilla waited, but nobody reopened it. Household credentials were the passes and security permissions, allowing approved staff to enter restricted palace areas and receive confidential information. Without them, her suspended aides could not reach working offices, private schedules, or senior officials. Charles had also approved independent briefing channels, meaning sensitive information would travel directly between his office, William, and Anne, without passing through the Queen's team. Every future schedule change now required written authorization carrying the King's approval. Anne understood how severe those measures felt, yet she refused to weaken them. The Princess Royal had not removed Camilla from public life. The Queen would retain her title, charitable work, ceremonial appearances, and place beside Charles. What disappeared were the informal mechanisms that had allowed her office to influence appointments and decisions unrelated to her duties. That distinction mattered because Anne wanted accountability, not revenge. Still, to Camilla, the result felt painfully similar to rejection. Camilla returned to her rooms with anger buried beneath humiliation. She believed the Princess Royal had taken one procedural failure and used it to destroy trust she had spent years earning. The Queen remembered every hostile headline and every room where her presence had once been treated as an embarrassment. She had finally found acceptance within the palace. Now, those same corridors seemed to be withdrawing it, one locked door at a time. Charles entered quietly, but found no words strong enough to comfort her. The king wanted to say the restrictions were temporary, yet the evidence stopped him. His sovereign responsibility, the duty to protect the monarchy's integrity above personal feeling, demanded that he examine every altered decision. His private love urged him to defend his wife. Trapped between the two, he touched Camilla's shoulder, then withdrew when she asked whether he believed Anne over her. A longtime aide interrupted the silence. He placed his access badge on Camilla's desk and admitted, in a recorded statement requested by the Internal Review, that staff had sometimes invoked her name without seeking direct permission. The official explained that her known preferences became shortcuts. One suggestion turned into several instructions, and aides defended their own choices by claiming the Queen had approved them. Camilla gripped the back of a chair. Then she released it. "How many decisions were made in my name?" she asked. The aide could not answer. His silence changed the shape of the conflict. Camilla no longer knew where her responsibility ended, and her staff's ambition began. Before Charles could stop her, she requested a private conversation with Anne, without the king, officials, or advisors present. For the first time, Camilla was not preparing to defend her influence. She was preparing to discover whether it had grown beyond even her control. They met without secretaries, folders, or witnesses. Anne entered expecting resistance. Camilla entered carrying the weight of a question she could no longer avoid. For several moments, neither woman sat down. Then Camilla admitted that she had approved the Windsor change, but denied ordering many of the other interventions performed in her name. Anne believed part of her. Yet belief could not erase responsibility, and forgiveness could not restore the influence that had just been removed. Camilla had chosen a small sitting room inside Buckingham Palace, far from the formal council chamber where senior royals handled serious household disputes. Here, neither woman could hide behind procedure or rank. The Queen Consort, Charles's wife and partner in public royal duties, sat opposite the Princess Royal, the title traditionally given to the monarch's eldest daughter. Both later signed a confidential account of the conversation, creating a documented record without exposing their private words publicly. Camilla told Anne that the interference had begun during a period when Charles was exhausted by relentless duties. She had started by delaying minor meetings and shortening briefing papers, because she believed the king needed protection. Each small decision made the next one easier. Before long, she convinced herself that anticipating his wishes was the same as serving them. The Queen admitted approving the Windsor substitution, but insisted she never ordered staff to block William's briefing or discourage the senior appointment. Anne listened without interrupting. She understood why Camilla feared losing the influence she had fought so hard to earn. The monarch's wife confessed that every withdrawn privilege returned her emotionally to the years when palace figures treated her as an unwanted presence. She had once entered rooms knowing people questioned whether she belonged. Now, after finally finding acceptance beside Charles, she felt those doors closing again. Anne softened, but only briefly. She admitted that Camilla's fear was real, and that some aides had exploited it. Still, the Princess Royal said the monarchy could not be governed by anyone's need to feel secure, not even the king's wife. Public duty required clear responsibility, because private insecurity, once mixed with royal access, could shape lives far beyond the palace. Camilla then revealed through their signed account that certain officials had expanded her occasional requests to strengthen their own positions. One preference became an instruction. One instruction became a standing rule. Aides began invoking the Queen's name before consulting her, creating an unofficial chain of command that neither Charles nor Anne could fully trace. Anne offered a narrow path forward. Camilla could continue her charitable work, attend ceremonies, and stand publicly beside the monarch. Yet she had to accept transparent boundaries, surrender informal control over unrelated decisions, and dismiss every aide who had misused her authority. The Princess Royal promised fairness, but she offered no restoration of the old system. Camilla accepted. Her voice broke as she asked for one final dignity. She wanted to tell Charles herself. Anne agreed and opened the door. She had won the institutional battle, but the final emotional judgment belonged to her brother. Now the king had to hear the truth from the woman he had defended for decades. By morning, the private rupture had escaped the palace walls. Britain awoke to a royal power struggle presented in enormous black letters, while cameras gathered outside Buckingham Palace and commentators argued over what Anne's intervention truly meant. Yet one image captured the mood more powerfully than any debate. The Princess Royal leaving through the gates alone, expression steady, as a crowd behind the barriers broke into unexpected applause. The palace responded with a restrained statement, confirming a reorganization of household advisory procedures, while refusing to mention the confrontation. Household advisory procedures were the internal rules deciding how information, schedules, and recommendations reached the monarch. Changing them mattered because the decision separated Charles's official authority from the informal influence exercised by private family offices. The statement protected Camilla from direct blame, but its careful wording confirmed that Anne's intervention had survived the night. Broadcasters seized on that silence. One morning program described the decision as a necessary defense of the sovereign, the reigning king or queen whose approval gives royal decisions their authority. Another called it a deeply personal humiliation for Charles's wife. Supporters praised Anne for defending duty without seeking reward. Critics argued that the queen consort had served beside the king through years of pressure and deserved correction in private, not restrictions that the entire country could see. One front page transformed the dispute into a national symbol. Beneath the stark headline, "Anne draws the line," a photograph showed Charles looking down while Camilla entered a separate vehicle. The image suggested distance before either had spoken publicly. The monarch appeared burdened rather than angry, while the queen seemed isolated. Their private pain had become public evidence, and every expression was now being treated like a verdict. William watched the coverage with growing concern. He found Anne before her next engagement and warned that the applause outside the gates might deepen his father's suffering. The prince respected his aunt's decision, but he reminded her that an institutional victory could still damage a marriage and divide a family. Anne agreed. She had never wanted to become a public hero at Camilla's expense, and she knew Charles might hear every cheer as a celebration of his wife's fall. The crowd delivered its clearest judgment during a live broadcast outside Buckingham Palace. A former military nurse stepped toward the microphone and said, "She protected the crown by telling her own family no." The broadcaster repeated the sentence minutes later, while the nurse's words spread across television reports and public discussion. That single remark captured the belief that Anne had chosen responsibility over comfort. Charles heard it from inside the palace. The king did not celebrate, and Camilla did not ask him to defend her publicly. Instead, the monarch prepared a short internal address for his family and senior officials. His words would decide whether he stood with his wife, his sister, or the principle separating them. The public had chosen its symbol of strength. Charles still faced the harder duty, turning a painful family rebellion into a settled royal decision. Charles entered the final family meeting with no folder in his hands. He had read the evidence, heard Camilla's admission, and spent a sleepless night confronting the cost of his own silence. This time, nobody spoke for him. Looking first at his wife and then at his sister, the king confirmed that Anne's restrictions would remain. His voice was heavy, but his decision was absolute. Affection could shape a family, never the authority of the crown. Charles formally separated Camilla's personal office from staffing, briefings, appointments, and household governance decisions outside her defined duties. Household governance meant the internal system controlling palace staff, schedules, communication, and official approval. The decision mattered because those hidden channels had allowed personal preferences to appear like commands from the sovereign. The queen consort would retain her title, public role, charitable work, and place beside her husband, but her informal influence over unrelated decisions had ended. William listened as his father established direct communication channels connecting the king, the prince, Anne, and senior officials. Every important proposal would reach the monarch without passing through another family office. The future king would receive his briefings unchanged, while the Princess Royal could raise concerns without relying on intermediaries. Charles knew these safeguards could not erase the damage, but they could prevent silence from becoming control again. Camilla accepted responsibility through a signed statement entered into the household review. She admitted approving the Windsor intervention and acknowledged that her desire to protect Charles had allowed unhealthy influence to gather around her. The Queen did not excuse herself. She also accepted that certain aides had expanded her wishes for their own advantage, but she understood that their actions had grown inside a system she helped create. Anne turned toward her brother and spoke without triumph. She told Charles that humiliating his wife had never been her purpose. The Princess Royal had acted because silence would have betrayed him, and the late Queen, whose standard of service placed duty above personal comfort. Their mother had taught them that loyalty sometimes required resistance. The king finally understood that his sister had opposed him to protect what he represented. Charles reached across the table and took Camilla's hand. He did not restore her influence or weaken the new boundaries. Then the monarch turned to Anne and quietly thanked her. That simple gesture settled what arguments could not. His marriage survived. His trust had changed. His sister's warning had been accepted. The implicated aides left their positions, while Camilla returned to clearly defined charitable and ceremonial duties. Anne refused any expanded role, proving she had never acted to increase her own power. William supported the new structure, and the family accepted the final division between private affection and royal authority. Anne's victory did not make her stronger than Camilla. It made the monarchy more accountable. Charles's earlier speechlessness became self-recognition, while his wife's loss of influence became the painful correction that preserved her place beside him. The palace doors closed on a family changed but no longer divided. Anne had drawn the line, Camilla had accepted it, and Charles had chosen duty without abandoning love. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.